And we're now at exercise 7, spinning and occlusion. So let's take a look at the shot that we're going to be working with now. So the challenge that we've got here is to roto our girl out, of course. And there's a few things that we need to be aware of before we even start. Now, the first question I always ask is, do we actually need to do full-on roto work? Is there another method that we can do to handle this? Now, there are certain jobs where you're required to do manual roto. The job requires roto splines. It's tricky to get accurate roto splines without doing the hard work. Now, luckily, there's a lot of projects that just require you to generate up an alpha channel, and it doesn't really matter how you do that. And this is something we are going to be looking at in, I believe, the next exercise, is how we can speed things up using other methods than just the roto we've been working with up till now. One of those is pulling keys, which is something we can do to a certain extent in Silhouette Effects. We do have a keying node, which I don't have up here at the moment, but if I go into my session and then settings, I can turn my keyer on at this point here and see my keying node come up here. I'm going to save this for a little bit later, and we'll be looking at this footage again in that context. But just so as you know that there are other ways of dealing with this particular footage, and this plays into actually what I need to get out of this particular shot at this particular time. So to begin with, we're just going to be rotoing the face here, because this is something that's going to show us a few interesting and new techniques that we haven't looked at before. Alright, what we're not going to be interested in is the hair, though the hair is particularly fun on this one. And we're also not going to be, again, worried about the clothes, though we will look at the clothes in a different context at some point. Alright, so let's analyse this shot now and just pick it apart a little bit and see where the proper challenges are. To begin with, we have a moving camera again, so that's going to be something that we can very easily come in and stabilise out, as we've done in previous shots. But really the big challenge for us here is we have spinning and occlusion. So what does that do for us? Well, the spinning means that the shape that we've got to roto out here at frame 36 is very, very different to what we're needing to roto out on frame 1. And the occlusion, well, when these shapes disappear out, how are we going to handle that? That's a very interesting little point. And when they come back in again, how are we going to handle that? So these are the things that we're going to be looking at in this particular exercise, and checking out any other problems as and when they come up. All right, so let's build up our base layer here, and we'll call this face. And let's stabilize this out just to remove the extra work of dealing with the camera. So let's come into our tracker again, as we've done before, and we're back to our planar track. Our point tracker here, and let's find a couple of points that are going to be good for us. We do have this point here, which looks promising, but it gets covered up at certain times, so that's not going to be great. So I'm going to take this point here. So Alt-click on that to move that around, and bring that up, and open up the both the match and the search size there. And let's come into our pre-processing and get this sorted out here. Now we're going to need another point here because I'm not going to trust just a single track to get me into the right area. So let's have a look and see what else we've got. All of these are a little bit sort of weak, so we do have something down here. While it's not specifically at the same point, I think if we take a look, it's it's a bit of a, let's take a look there. Yep, it's a radiator, and it looks like it's a little bit further behind the board, but it should be close enough that it's going to be fine when we average all these out. I'm going to trust that these are all right to begin with, and let's just track these forwards. I forgot to select my first tracker. Let's just select that one, track that one forwards now. It's probably right not to trust it. It does seem a little bit bouncy. Let's see what happens when I denoise. Bump all of that up a little bit. A little bit better. Alright, I am going to want a third marker here just to give us a better average. So I will add another tracker. I'm going to go with, maybe let's have a little look through the various colour channels, see what, if anything, pops out at us. Apart from the fact that the blue channel's really noisy, and then that means it's probably untrackable because nothing really stands out properly there. Green, I think this here might be a good enough corner that we can make something of this. So I have it fairly large, so it's going to be it's fairly hefty. But let's see if we can do something about that. Let's come to the channel. We're going to go with the green here. Let's turn us back to all channels and just take a quick look at what this is doing. Click the preview on. See what happens when we sharpen this up. I'm going to blur it just a little bit just to get rid of some of that noise. Maybe the contrast here is going to be good enough. There's only one way to find out. Let's turn the preview off here and track it through. Well, the first few frames seem pretty good, so let's hit play on that, and then we'll keep an eye on the window here and make sure that nothing changes too drastically. Nice, happy with that. So if we take a quick look at the at all three tracks here, you'll see that the motion that it's tracking here looks consistent between all three of them. So that does bode well for this average track that we're going to do. So we'll take those three tracks, mark them up, hit average, and here's our tracker 4, which is the average of the other one. So I'm going to delete these other ones here because I'm not going to use them. And I'm going to take my tracker 4 and call this camera motion. Select my face as well, so I can now hit apply the position, hit OK, check out the face, hit stabilize up and hit play. And that's looking really good. So that's taken out pretty much all of our camera motion, leaving us just with the motion of the girl. Alright, so where do we start? Well, let's start with that nose, because that's going to be quite an interesting little problem that we're going to be doing. So let's come in and let's do a X-spline, bring this in, and let's take our nose here. Cool, alright. That's nose enough for me. There we go. And let's name this up. So we'll call this nose. And take a quick look through what we're doing. So at this point here, we want the nose to actually start coming around there. So we need to really, this is something that we haven't talked about before, and I'm actually, it's a bit strange that we haven't talked about this before, considering how far we are into the whole thing. Well, I'm just going to tag all of these up now, and you'll see the tags obviously going a little bit out of place, but that's fine. Cool, well, let's animate up this nose now. So we're not going to use point-to-point movements, which is what we've been doing so far. So point-to-point movements mean that where we started off with the tip of the nose, we move to the next frame and it's the tip of the nose as well. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to almost randomly move my shape so that it fits what I'm trying to do, but let's see what happens when we animate it off. You can see here, this is actually a very quick example of why you really want to be always matching your shape point to point, and why it's a good idea to be using the transform here instead of moving the points themselves, because by using the transform we're much less tempted, if you were ever tempted, to shift around the points and rotate the points. You'd never really do that using this method here. So let's just move that into place. And at this point the nose has now been sort of consumed by the rest of the face, so we don't need to track this anymore. So what I'm going to do is do what we've done before and turn our visibility off and turn the visibility back on at this point here. There we go. So this has animated up the opacity of this from 0 to 100 and added nice hold keyframes for us. And the same here. We're going to go to the last frame where we can see it, which is this one here, and let's just transform this up so we know where the tip of the nose is going. It's going there, and we're going to have to make an educated guess about the rest of it. Luckily it's moving small enough so that we don't really have to worry about that too much, and then we come to this point here and I can then turn the visibility off on that again. And because we're using the hold keyframes down here, it's going to be visible right up until that point, and then it's just going to disappear again. And then we can come over to this side where we can start to see the nose again, and here is where we can start to sort of transform this back around again. Now I'm still going to use the same points. I'm still going to be matching point to point, so I flip that around by just scaling it there. Let's turn our nose back on at this point here. So this animation here doesn't really make any difference at all because we have our opacity turned down to 0. And we can turn that back off again there. So let's have a look at how that looks with the overlay on, and let's change the colour now. That's not the perfect colour for it at the moment. So let's go to our prefs, alpha overlay colour under the viewer. Let's make that a lovely purple. See if that works better. Yeah, that's working a bit better. Cool. So that's our nose done. Let's take a look at see what else we've got going on. Well, let's take a look at the face here, because we've got a great thing which is happening because she's smiling, got mouth open. We can see a whole load of background going on here, which is only visible for a couple of frames. So what's going to be the best way of handling that? Well, again, it's all about doing the sort of least amount of work that we can, making the simplest shapes go on here. So what I would do to begin with here is we're going to be making another shape for the chin. Let's rough out some of these shapes. So let's come in, turn my overlays back on, so I can actually make another couple of these. So let's make one for the chin. And we'll go a little bit deeper. So we're following the bone structure here of the face. And we're taking that in, so let's call this one chin. Oops. Call this chin. Let's go in a little bit further. I'm going to just bring that out just a little bit. Sweet. And now let's take one for the mouth as well here. Now this is going to be quite interesting because we're going to need one for the for the cheek area here. But let's see if we can get away. Let's take a look, see what's going to happen with this. We can easily get away with just having one big shape coming in that's taking over the middle of the face here. Or in fact, that's even better. We could probably have one that's taking on most of this. What would this be? The left-hand side of the face. Well, in reality, it's her right-hand side, but it's going to be left on the screen with us. I'm going to call it the left-hand side. So let's take a look and bring this in. So going with the brow, and notice that I'm going to come straight down here. Got my big bit of overlap going on with this one here. Let's bring this up, bring this out. It's getting all confusing with all the red outlines, so let's come in and change some of these up a little bit. Probably do want that one to be there. Do we have another? Yes, I do. There we go. It's a hidden area there. There we go. Cool. All right, so there's the basic shape. Now, what we are going to have to do again, let's call this one face left. What we are going to have to do here is have another small shape coming in to chop out just this little bit here that's going to be showing us, hang on a second, it's going to be showing us the background, but we'll come to that in a moment. But we're doing it this way, we can break the face into the minimum number of shapes that we need to, because we could come in and we could do tons and tons of shapes, tons of small shapes, and I know people do that. But that to me is not, in this case, is actually not the most efficient way of doing it. So let's come in and let's just try and sort our cheek out here, or our chin. And it's slipping, of course, because she's not moving in a linear way. I would expect nothing less. How far are we going with this one? We are actually taking it a little bit further back, but that we can deal with here. As long as we've got a good amount of coverage. Cool. I'm going to just bring that down a little bit there. Again, I'm using the distort, which I really do like to use because it saves me from having to do loads and loads of repositioning and rotation and all that sort of stuff. And this, this movement here, this sort of spinning movement where it's moving on the sort of Y rotation. I mean, this is perfect for doing that. Let's can see I actually, even on my original one there, I've tried to take it out a little bit too far. Or not far enough. So I did change my mind halfway through. Let's go back and reshape this just a tiny bit, just to take that into consideration. There we go. Cool, so that's the chin sorted out. Let's finish the face. Let's lock our nose, lock our chin. Come to the face left. Come to this frame here, and let's transform this up and see where we're going. In this case, it's very easy to get sort of lost where you're going. So what I'm going to look at here is this shape here is going to be around the brow. And let's split that in two, so let's take that there, and then I can use my favourite distort just to make sure that's all filled in nicely. We do seem to be slipping a little bit down there, so cool, and then let's fill the rest of this in. Great, so we're getting there. I need to just reshape just a little bit. Remember, R for reshape, T for transform. Just to touch us in just a little bit. Take the overlays off just to see what's going on there. Maybe tap that up to 30. Cool, so we're getting there. And now we're going to need the right hand side of the face. Turn my overlays back on. Come back with my X-spline again. Nice and generous on the right hand side of the face. And we're starting still at the most complex frame that I can find for the right hand side. So that's the one where most of these edges are showing. Let's come back up. And let's use the Alt key just to square that off just a little bit there. Let's take this back down to 20. There we go. So let's move that about there. Transform this up. I might need to reshape a little bit here, as it is sinking in just a little bit further. Same with this one. Bring this out just a tiny bit, so we are still seeing the right hand side of the shape, the right hand side of the face. And when it gets here, which is our last visible frame for the right hand side, transform that up, bring it in there, try and reshape it as best we can. We just have to sort of imagine where it is and then hope that as we move through, if we're right, we'll be able to see it. Cool, and here's a very good time again to now turn off our face right, and let's add another keyframe. Let's come back one frame to turn it back on again, turn the overlays off, and we've now got our face done pretty well there. Let's crank that up a little bit, actually maybe to 40. We've got a couple of little issues still. Let's see where those issues are, what it's going to be with the face left here. Just need to tweak that just a tiny bit. And the nose as well. Let's unlock that. Just tweak that a little bit. Cool, we can get that looking, you know, we can get that really as accurate as we need to. Let's see what happens when we turn motion blur on. That should help smooth things out a little bit. Cool, the only thing is we've still got this little area here that we need to get rid of. So let's lock all these back up again. Turn this back to 20%. Back into our X-spline again, and I'm just going to basically chop this area out. Take that as one little bit. Call it gap 1, set it to subtract. Turn our output back on. And this is only going to be maybe a couple of frames, if that. And just use that to chop it out for the frames that we need it to be. This is actually the, turn this on and turn it off here because we don't need it to be on here. And at this point we can also use this here. Cool. So we see it without overlays. Crank this back up to 40. You can see it's actually far easier just to add a small shape for a couple of frames than it is to add another 1, 2, 3 points that we'd have to do here to chop this out, and then manage those points for the rest of the duration of the rotor. Cool, let's look at how easy it's going to be now to get from where we are now, frame 25, back to the beginning. So this first second worth of footage, we have a little look here. We can see that that point where it's spinning round is quite tricky, and we've added quite a lot of little keyframes in. But this bit here, from frame 1 to 25, is fairly straightforward. So let's see what we can do with that. Because instead of animating out the shapes now, we're going to again come back in and use the layer group instead. By far the best way of doing it this time. So let's come in, turn our overlays back on, and let's get this a bit closer to the center in terms of our anchor point. Just going to help us out a little bit there. And let's see what we've got. Okay, so we should be able to just come in and let's see what happens. Whoa, everything, when we try and animate the transform with the layer turned on, that we've got the stabilize turned on as well, things start going a little bit tricky and a little bit sort of out of whack. So at this point we need to turn the stabilize off to be able to come in and properly sort of line this up a little bit more. So that's looking all right. So we've got the sort of base movements going on here. Let's come in. We can see we do still actually now need to come in and play around with the individual shapes themselves, including face left and face right. These are probably the two main ones we need to deal with. So let's take face left first. Because the face itself is actually changing shape. It's not just a case of sort of rotating or rescaling. And I am trying to get most of the work done with the transform tool, but we will need to use reshape quite extensively on this one. But again, when we're working with the reshape, we can try to select a number of control points. And the same with this one here. Take those two control points there and probably just bring those in. Might have to change the tension on this. Cool, that should be fine. And here's something else that's new. Let's just lock and hide face left and face right for the moment, just so we can concentrate on our chin. Because this is something we haven't really looked at before. If I select a number of control points here, come into transform mode once, it's going to try and transform the entire shape again. If I click on the transform again, it's now going to take me to just transforming those points that I had selected there. So this is another really, really nice workflow feature. It's like such a huge sort of time-saving feature. And that, again, the keyboard shortcut to go into transform mode is T. If you hit T twice, you go into the control points transform mode. I didn't really want to do that. Of course, let's come back to our reshape. Take our chin back over. And we'll take our chin back to where I believe it should be there. Let's have a look as it animates through. It's pretty wrong round about there, but that's all cool. So that's nice. So we've got a combination now going on of the of keyframing the layers here. We've got the matrix, which is using our motion tracker to do pretty much most of the heavy lifting when it comes to the camera motion. And then we have our individual shapes, which we've broken up into tons of little ones, doing the rest of the work there. Let's come back into our face right. Just get this looking a little bit nicer for you before we finish off. And that's not 100%, but I think it gives you the idea of where we want to be going with it. All right, we're going to have a look at one more feature before we wrap everything up, and that is this little one down here, this multi-frame tool here. Now, if you notice, we do have a gap from around about, oh, that looks all right there, from around about frame 25 or so. We've got this little gap going between the left hand and right hand side of our face shapes, and now I want to clean that up. Now, if you look at the face right, we've actually got a number of different keyframes going on already. So I could come into each individual frame or each individual keyframe and change that up and transform that out, reshape it. But in doing that, I do stand the risk of losing the integrity of the mask that I've created. Probably not so important in this particular instance, because this is just being used as a sort of a gap to cover everything up, so it's not critical. Where if we wanted to move everything on a particular side of a shape down just a few pixels, to do that across a whole host of keyframes would be tedious and impossible to get 100% accurate across the entire range. So that's why we have multi-frame. If I turn multi-frame on here, this blue bar up at the top of our timeline, which we've been ignoring, this suddenly comes into play. So by dragging this blue line in, and then by changing any of the keyframes, let's come into our face right, come to our reshape here, and move that one over. This will now move that point over the same amount of pixels across the entire range of the keyframes between our blue bar here. So let's say if I undo that a second and move my blue bar, so it's only moving from frame 9 to frame 25, and do exactly the same things I did before. It's now changing that, but it's not changing or adjusting any of the keyframes outside of that range. In this instance, we do want to have it affecting the entire range, but there we go. Cool. So that's multi-frame. Very, very, very useful. Well, that's it for now. We've taken a look at some quite interesting little techniques, I think, in this particular exercise, and discussed certain strategies that we'd be using to rotoscope a face, and how we start to look for where the basic shapes are going to be that you want to take out. For example, if we were just starting at frame 1 and working our way across, we could have taken the face out here in one shape, but it soon becomes very, very obvious that just trying to do all of this in one shape is an impossibility. So taking a look at the most complex keyframe or the most complex frame is very, very important. And the same here. It's all a case of picking your battles. If we were to let's come in and turn our overlays back on. If we were to come in and take this shape here and actually add the points that we needed to get rid of this little gap that actually only lasts maybe 4 frames, you know, the amount of work that we'd have to do to control these points here far outweigh the amount of work we have to do just to add in a small couple of other little shapes here that is going to do the subtraction for us. That's it for this exercise. We are going to be looking at this same footage in a different context in the next exercise, as well as some other new stuff, when we start dealing with keying, and we're going to use that to talk about what we can do to deal with hair details, and how we can avoid doing a whole host of rotoscoping jobs by using other features contained within Silhouette. But that is exercise 8, keying.